A can of tuna hit the counter, a skillet went on the burner, and before the evening news finished its first story, supper was on the table. 10 minutes. That is all it took for a grandmother in this country to feed a household on whatever she already had. She did not check a recipe. She did not drive to the store. She opened a cabinet, pulled out what was there, and turned it into something hot. Halfway down this countdown, a single can and 2 slices of bread become the best meal in the kitchen. And at number 7, a bowl that started with nothing but a can and a handful of crackers fooled grown men into thinking someone had been cooking all afternoon. These were the suppers nobody wrote down, and when the women who made them were gone, the meals went with them. So hit subscribe, because here are 30 suppers Grandma made in under 10 minutes that we lost everyone. Number 30. Fried bologna sandwich. She pulled 2 slices of bologna from the package, scored the edges with a knife so they would not curl, and dropped them into a dry skillet. 30 seconds aside. The meat puffed up in the center and browned at the edges, and the whole kitchen smelled like a diner at lunchtime. She laid those slices on soft white bread with yellow mustard, pressed it flat with her palm, and cut it corner to corner. No plate sometimes, just a paper towel. A kid could eat 2 of those standing at the counter before the streetlights came on, and nobody called it a recipe because it barely qualified as cooking. But it was supper, and it was ready before you washed your hands. Number 29. Bread and gravy. A tablespoon of bacon drippings from the jar she kept next to the stove, a spoonful of flour stirred in until it turned the color of sand, and then milk poured slow until it thickened. Salt and pepper. That was the entire recipe. She spooned it over toast or leftover biscuits, and it filled a belly the same way a roast dinner would have if there had been money for one. Whole families in Appalachia ate this 3 nights a week during the winters when the mines were not hiring. It took 5 minutes, cost almost nothing, and vanished from American kitchens the moment grocery stores started selling frozen dinners. Before I go any further, for the folks who want more recipes like these all in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. It is a collection of old recipes just like the ones on this list, and you can find it on my website vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not push it again. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 28. Egg in a hole. She tore a circle out of the middle of a slice of bread with a juice glass, buttered both sides, and laid it in a hot skillet. Cracked an egg right into the hole. The bread toasted golden while the egg set underneath it, and the little round cutout fried beside it like a bonus. Some people called it a bird's nest. Others called it a one-eyed jack. Your grandmother probably called it supper. It took 3 minutes and used 1 egg, 1 slice of bread, and a pat of butter. The whole thing fit in your hand. Number 27. Sardines on toast. She opened the tin with the key that rolled back the lid, forked the sardines onto a piece of toast, and squeezed half a lemon over the top. Some grandmothers added a thin slice of raw onion. Others sprinkled hot sauce. The tin cost pennies and packed more protein than a pork chop. Men who worked the docks in Baltimore and Gloucester ate this at the end of a shift because it was fast, filling, and you could eat it with one hand. The taste was strong enough that some kids refused it, but the adults never stopped. Number 26. Creamed chipped beef on toast. The military called it something unprintable. Your grandmother called it Tuesday. She melted butter in a saucepan, stirred in flour, added milk, and dropped in thin ribbons of dried chipped beef from a glass jar. The whole thing bubbled into a salty, creamy blanket that she poured over toast. Servicemen brought the recipe home from both world wars, and it stayed in American kitchens for decades because it cost almost nothing, used shelf-stable ingredients, and filled a plate in under 7 minutes. Most people under 50 have never heard of it. Number 25. Tomato sandwich. 2 slices of white bread, a thick slice of tomato from the garden, mayonnaise, salt, and pepper. That was the whole thing. She did not toast the bread. She did not add lettuce. She let the tomato juice soak into the soft bread until the bottom slice turned pink. And that was exactly how it was supposed to be. In the South, this was a summer supper all by itself. You ate it standing over the sink because it dripped, and you made a second one because the first one was gone before you realized you were still hungry. Nobody timed these meals. There was no stopwatch on the counter, no cooking show counting down the seconds. 10 minutes was not a challenge. It was just life. A woman who had been working all day, or watching children all day, or doing both, walked into her kitchen at 5:30 in the afternoon and fed people. She did not plan it. She opened a cabinet and looked at what was there, the way a carpenter looks at a scrap pile and sees a shelf. The speed was not the point. The speed was a side effect of having done the same thing 1,000 times with the same handful of ingredients. These were not shortcuts. They were the original meals, the ones that existed before cooking became complicated. Number 24. Deviled ham on crackers. The little can with the red devil on the label sat in pantries from coast to coast. She spread it on saltines or Ritz crackers, and that was supper when nothing else made sense. The spread inside was ground ham, mustard, and spices, mashed into a paste that tasted better than it looked. Kids ate it for lunch. Grandmothers ate it for supper. It required no cooking, no heat, and no cleanup beyond a butter knife and a napkin. The brand has not changed the label in over a century, but the women who kept it stocked have mostly gone. Number 23. Vienna sausages and beans. She opened 2 cans, dumped them into the same pot, and heated the whole thing on the stove for 4 minutes. The little sausages were soft and salty. The beans were sweet. Together, they made something that passed for supper without a single complaint from anyone at the table. She served it with bread on the side to soak up the juice, and that was the meal. It showed up in hunting cabins, fishing camps, and kitchens where the grocery money had run thin a week before payday. Number 22. Cornbread crumbled in buttermilk. She took a piece of leftover cornbread, broke it into a tall glass, and poured cold buttermilk over the top. Ate it with a spoon. In the rural South, this was supper, breakfast, and a midnight snack, depending on the hour. The cornbread softened in the buttermilk until it was halfway between cereal and pudding, tangy and filling and gone in 3 minutes. Some families added a sliced green onion on top. Others sprinkled black pepper. It required no heat, no cooking, and no explanation to anyone who grew up eating it. Number 21. Fried potatoes and onions. She peeled 2 potatoes, sliced them thin, and dropped them into a skillet with a sliced onion and a spoonful of lard. Covered it with a lid and let it cook until the bottom layer turned crisp and brown. Flipped the whole thing once. Salt and pepper on top, maybe a splash of vinegar if the family was from the right part of the country. This was a full supper on a Friday night when the icebox held nothing else, and it tasted good enough that nobody minded. The whole skillet was empty in 10 minutes. Number 20. Peanut butter and banana sandwich. She spread peanut butter thick on 1 slice of bread, laid banana coins across it, and pressed the second slice on top. No toasting, no honey, no fuss. A kid could eat this for supper and sleep full. Grandmother served it with a glass of milk and called it done. It needed no heat, no cleanup, and no skill beyond opening a jar. The combination sounds like a snack, but in households where supper had to be fast and cheap, this was the meal. Elvis made a fried version famous, but the original was simpler and quicker and belonged to every grandmother who ever ran out of time. Number 19. Open-face tuna melt. She drained a can of tuna, mixed it with mayonnaise and a squeeze of mustard, spread it on a slice of bread, and laid a piece of American cheese on top. Put the whole thing under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and turned brown at the edges. That was it. 5 minutes from can to table, and it came out of the oven looking like something a diner would charge you real money for. The bread stayed soft underneath and crunchy at the edges where the cheese had dripped over. She served it on a plate with a pickle on the side, or she served it on a paper towel with nothing at all. The tuna melt lived in diners and lunch counters all over this country for decades. Waitresses did not even write down the order because everyone knew what it was. But the open-face version, the one your grandmother made, was different from the diner version. She used whatever bread was in the house. She did not toast it first. She let the broiler do all the work in one pass, and the result was better than anything you could order because she knew exactly how long her oven took to brown cheese. She could tell by the smell when the edges started to darken, and she pulled the pan out at exactly the right second without setting a timer. Lunch counters across the Midwest kept a version on their menus through the 1970s, and when those counters closed, the sandwich moved back into the home kitchen where it had started. That knowledge left with her. You can still make a tuna melt today, but it will not taste the same because you will open a recipe on your phone instead of just knowing. The strange thing about these meals is that nobody thought of them as fast food. That phrase did not exist yet for most of the women who made them. There was no slow food to compare it to. There was just food. You made it when people were hungry, and you made it from what you had. The 10-minute part was invisible because the skill behind it was invisible. A woman who can peel and slice a potato in 45 seconds did not learn that from a video. She learned it from doing it every single day for 40 years. The speed was not a trick. It was muscle memory woven into hands that never stopped moving. When those hands stopped, so did the meals. Number 18. Canned salmon patties. She drained the can, picked out the bones and skin, mashed the fish with a fork, mixed in a beaten egg and a handful of crushed crackers, shaped it into patties, and fried them in a hot skillet. Both sides golden brown. The whole process took 8 minutes, and the patties came out with a crust that cracked when you bit through it. She served them with ketchup or tartar sauce or nothing at all. Canned salmon was cheaper than fresh fish in every part of the country, and these patties showed up at supper tables from Oregon to Georgia without anyone writing down instructions. Number 17. Spam and eggs. She sliced the spam thin, fried the slices until the edges crisped, and scrambled 2 eggs in the same skillet with the leftover grease. Served it with toast. The spam turned salty and caramelized in the pan, and the eggs picked up that flavor. Hormel introduced Spam in 1937, and by the end of the Second World War, it had found a permanent place in American kitchens. Grandmothers kept a can in the pantry the way other people kept a fire extinguisher, something you hoped you would not need but were glad to have when you did. The whole meal took 6 minutes and used 2 ingredients. Number 16. Hot dog and baked beans. She boiled 2 hot dogs in a small pot, opened a can of baked beans, heated them in a saucepan, and put the whole thing on a plate. Some grandmothers sliced the hot dogs into the beans and served it as a stew. Others kept them separate with a piece of bread on the side. Either way, the meal took less time than setting the table. Church camps served this to 100 kids at once. Families served it on nights when nobody felt like trying. It was honest food that filled a stomach and asked nothing in return. Number 15. Fried egg sandwich. She cracked an egg into a buttered skillet, broke the yolk with the edge of the spatula, let it cook until the white set firm, and slid it between 2 pieces of bread with salt and pepper. Some added a slice of American cheese, others added ketchup. The sandwich took 3 minutes and used 1 egg, 2 slices of bread, and a pat of butter. Truckers ordered it at roadside diners at 2 in the morning. Grandmothers made it at 6 in the evening when the day had been too long for anything else. It tasted the same in both places. Number 14. Tomato soup with grilled cheese. She opened a can of Campbell's, added a can of milk, and stirred it on the stove while she buttered 2 slices of bread, laid a slice of American cheese between them, and pressed the sandwich into a hot skillet. The soup was ready by the time the second side of the sandwich turned brown. This combination was the most common weeknight supper in America for 3 decades. Diners served it as a lunch special. Schools served it on Fridays. Mothers served it on any night when the answer to the question of what to make was simply whatever required the least thought and the fewest dishes. The 2 foods were designed to go together, the creamy acid of the soup cutting through the fat of the melted cheese, and the crisp bread giving you something to dip. Campbell's sold more tomato soup in the United States than any other variety for most of the 20th century, and a good part of that number came from women who paired it with a grilled cheese sandwich the way you pair shoes with socks. You did not think about it. You just did it. The sandwich had to be cut diagonally, not straight across. Every grandmother insisted on that, and none of them could tell you why, except that it was the right way. The soup had to be stirred slowly so the milk did not scald, and you ate the two together by tearing the sandwich into strips and dipping each one until the bread turned soft and orange. Today you can still buy the same can, but the sandwich next to it will not taste the same because nobody stands at the stove pressing it flat with a spatula the way she did. A woman eating alone does not stop cooking for herself because she forgot how. She stops because the quiet at the table is louder than the hunger. These 10-minute suppers were not just about speed. They were about the decision to sit down, put food on a plate instead of eating from the container, and treat yourself like someone worth feeding. That decision got harder as kitchens got emptier. The women who made these meals understood something that the modern world took decades to rediscover. Feeding yourself is not a chore. It is an act of respect. And the fastest meal in the house still counts if you sit down to eat it. Number 13. Liverwurst sandwich. She spread liverwurst thick on rye bread or white bread, added a thin slice of onion and a smear of yellow mustard, and pressed the top slice down. The liverwurst was soft and rich and tasted like something from another country, which it was. German and Polish immigrants brought it to the Midwest, and it stayed in delis and kitchen pantries for generations. Kids either loved it or hated it. Grandmothers loved it because it required no cooking, no heat, and no time. You opened the package, spread it, and ate. Number 12. Canned corned beef hash with a fried egg. She opened the can, scooped the hash into a hot skillet, pressed it flat with the back of a spoon, and let the bottom crust without touching it for 4 minutes. Then she cracked an egg on top, covered the skillet with a lid, and let the steam cook the egg until the white set. She slid the whole thing onto a plate in one piece, the hash crispy underneath, and the egg sitting on top like a crown. This was the supper that truck stop waitresses served without being asked. A working man could eat this at 11 at night and sleep full. The hash came out of the can looking like something a dog would eat, but 5 minutes in a hot skillet transformed it into something with a crust you could hear when you cut through it with a fork. The egg yolk broke over the top and ran into the crevices of the hash, and that was the sauce. No gravy, no ketchup, no garnish, just the yolk. Brands like Hormel and Mary Kitchen printed the recipe right on the label, but nobody needed to read it because the method was always the same. Hot skillet, flat press, do not touch it. The secret was patience. You had to let the bottom turn almost black before you flipped it, and most people did not have the nerve. Your grandmother did. She knew that the dark crust was where all the flavor lived, and she waited for it every single time. She made this on the nights when she did not feel like explaining what was for supper, because one look at the plate answered the question. And nobody ever asked for seconds, because the first plate was already more than enough. Number 11. Cheese toast. She laid slices of American cheese or cheddar on bread, put it under the broiler, and watched it until the cheese melted and browned at the edges. Pulled it out, let it cool for 30 seconds, and served it. Some added a sprinkle of paprika. Others added a thin slice of tomato underneath the cheese before broiling. It took 4 minutes and used 2 ingredients. Cheese toast was the meal between meals, the supper that was not quite a sandwich and not quite a snack, but filled the space between lunch and bedtime without complaint. Number 10. Canned bean soup with saltines. She opened a can of bean with bacon soup, added half a can of water, heated it on the stove, and served it in a bowl with a sleeve of saltine crackers on the side. The soup was thick and salty. The crackers softened in it until they turned into something between bread and dumpling. This was a winter supper in houses where the furnace ran all night and the grocery budget did not stretch past Thursday. Campbell's and Progresso sold millions of cans of this soup every year, and most of them ended up in bowls just like this, eaten at kitchen tables by people who did not call it a meal but ate it like one. Number 9. Scrambled eggs and toast. She cracked 3 eggs into a bowl, added a splash of milk, beat them with a fork, and poured them into a buttered skillet. Stirred slow. Pushed the curds to the center until they were just set, still soft in the middle. She served them on a plate next to toast with butter, and that was supper. Breakfast for dinner was not a concept yet. It was just eggs. You ate them when you had them, morning or night. The whole thing was on the table in 5 minutes and cost less than anything else in the kitchen. Number 8. Pimento cheese sandwich. She mixed shredded cheddar with chopped pimentos from a small jar, added mayonnaise, and spread it between 2 slices of bread. In the South, pimento cheese was a staple kept in the refrigerator the way other households kept mustard. It showed up at church suppers, on picnic tables, and on kitchen counters at 6 in the evening when nobody had planned anything else. The Masters Golf Tournament in Augusta, Georgia, still sells a pimento cheese sandwich for a few dollars, and the line wraps around the concession stand every year. Your grandmother's version cost a fraction of that and tasted better because she made it herself. Number 7. Canned chili over crackers. She opened a can of Hormel or Wolf brand chili, heated it in a saucepan for 5 minutes, and ladled it into a bowl over a handful of crushed saltines. Some grandmothers added shredded cheese on top. Others added a spoonful of raw onion. The chili was thick and peppery, and the crackers soaked it up and turned soft in the bowl. Grown men ate 2 bowls of this and leaned back from the table satisfied, never knowing or caring that the whole meal came from a single can. It was fast, it was filling, and it proved that supper did not need to be complicated to be good. She never said she was tired. She never said the cabinet was almost empty. She never sat down at the table and admitted that tonight's supper came from a can because there was nothing else. She just made it. She put it on a plate, set it in front of you, and sat down across the table as if this was exactly what she had planned. The 10-minute meal was not a compromise. It was a kindness disguised as cooking. She fed you without letting you know how close the margin was, and she did it so well that 40 years later, you remember the food and not the effort. That is the part we lost, not the recipes, the grace. Number 6. Egg salad sandwich. She boiled eggs earlier in the week and kept them in the refrigerator. When supper came around, she peeled 2, chopped them with a fork, mixed them with mayonnaise, a pinch of mustard, salt, and pepper, and spread the mixture on bread. The sandwich was cold and creamy and tasted like a packed lunch even when you ate it at the kitchen table. Women packed this in their husbands' lunch pails for factory shifts and then made the same thing for their own supper because it was already in the bowl. Number 5. Cottage cheese and canned peaches. She scooped cottage cheese onto a plate, opened a can of peach halves in heavy syrup, laid 2 or 3 halves next to the cottage cheese, and drizzled the syrup over the top. That was supper. No heat, no cooking, no mess. Women who were watching their weight ate this every night for years and never complained because the sweetness of the peaches made it feel like dessert. It showed up on diet plans in magazines through the 1960s and 1970s, and grandmothers kept eating it long after the diet stopped because they liked the taste. Number 4. Fried Spam sandwich. She sliced the Spam thick this time, fried both sides until the edges turned dark and crispy, and put it on bread with a slice of onion and a squirt of mustard. This was a different meal from Spam and eggs. The thick-cut version had a chew to it, a caramelized crust that tasted more like ham steak than canned meat. Soldiers brought the taste for Spam home from the Pacific, and their mothers kept cooking it because it lasted forever in the pantry and fried up fast. The sandwich took 4 minutes. It traveled in lunchboxes and showed up at supper tables without apology. Number 3. Cinnamon toast. She buttered a slice of bread, sprinkled sugar and cinnamon across the top, and put it under the broiler until the sugar melted into a glaze. The toast came out with a crisp, sweet crust that crackled when you bit through it. Some grandmothers made this as a treat. Others made it as supper on nights when the only thing left in the house was bread, butter, and the spice rack. Either way, it took 2 minutes and tasted warm enough to make a cold kitchen feel smaller. Children asked for this by name and never knew it was the meal their grandmother made when there was nothing else to offer. Number 2. Welsh rarebit. She melted butter in a saucepan, stirred in flour, added milk and a handful of shredded cheddar, and kept stirring until the cheese melted into a thick, smooth sauce. A splash of Worcestershire, a pinch of dry mustard, and she poured the whole thing over toast. It looked plain. It tasted like the richest thing in the kitchen. Welsh rarebit traveled from British pubs to American homes in the early 20th century, and for decades it was the answer to the question of what to make when you had cheese, bread, and nothing else. The name confused people. There was no rabbit in it. There never was. Number 1. A bowl of canned soup with buttered bread. She opened the can, poured it into a pot, added water or milk, and stirred it until it was hot. She buttered a slice of bread and set it on the edge of the bowl. That was supper. It does not sound like a meal. It does not look like a meal. But for millions of women in this country, it was the last thing they cooked at the end of the longest days, and it meant they still cared enough to sit down and eat. The soup changed. Chicken noodle, vegetable, cream of tomato. The bread stayed the same. The ritual stayed the same. A woman alone in her kitchen, standing at the stove, stirring a pot that took 3 minutes to heat because she decided that tonight she would still feed herself. We did not lose the recipe. The recipe is still on the label. We lost the woman who made it. Cinnamon sugar toast is a delightful breakfast combo that was a go-to for grandmas, not just for their kids and grandkids, but for their own mornings as well. Sometimes all you need from the world is a good toast and a healthy hit of glucose, and cinnamon sugar does that like nothing else. Cinnamon in particular started getting a lot more popular as an ingredient during the times most of our grandmas were alive, since a lot of bakeries started using it with maple syrup and vanilla, though it was always a popular choice. It is just that little variations in daily meals did not start popping up until the 1910s or 1920s, and since then, cinnamon has become a mainstay highlight of all things that scream USA food. Cracklin bread came from that day, specifically from the cracklins left behind after pork fat was rendered into lard in a massive iron kettle over an open fire. The cracklins, crisp, golden bits of fried-out pork skin and fat, were stirred directly into cornbread batter and baked in a cast-iron skillet greased with the fresh lard. The bread came out dense, rich, studded with pockets of crunch, and flavored with a porky depth no other cornbread could touch. Through the 1930s and 40s, families who kept hogs made cracklin bread only in the weeks following the kill, when the cracklins were freshest. When families stopped keeping hogs, the cracklins disappeared, and with them the bread that only tasted right made from a pig you raised yourself. Cottage cheese and pineapple salad was a cold dish that made its way onto countless dinner plates in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s without ever needing an oven or a skillet. It was a mix of convenience and charm, using just a scoop of creamy cottage cheese, a few chunks of canned pineapple, and a single crisp lettuce leaf as a bed. Some versions even topped the whole thing with a glossy red maraschino cherry for visual flair, making it feel like a mini dessert that snuck onto the dinner table. It was served as a salad, a side, or sometimes even a light dessert, perfect for hot evenings or last-minute guests. Housewives appreciated it because it required no cooking and could be assembled in under 10 minutes with ingredients straight from the pantry and fridge. It had the creamy, sweet, tangy flavor balance that defined so many mid-century American dishes. Maybe it sounds strange today, but back then, it was standard on picnic spreads, potluck tables, and family dinners. If you saw that cherry on top, you knew exactly what was underneath. There really is nothing like a grilled cheese sandwich, a meal that you have seen in the media, in kitchens, all over neighborhoods, in stalls and diners, and just about everywhere else. Sometimes you are in too much of a rush to make anything proper, or you just might only have some cheese and bread on hand. Everyone still needs to eat, but does that mean we have to wash down something we do not even like the taste of? No! And the popularity of grilled cheese sandwiches is a testament to that. But how did these sandwiches get so popular? Well, most Americans can only remember them as a loving meal that their grandmother would make in times exactly like what we described. The best part is that regardless of what kind of bread or cheese you like, every combo works just as well, which is something we cannot say about many dishes. When the nearest ocean was 500 miles away and fresh fish meant a creek full of catfish you didn't have time to catch, canned salmon was the answer. Salmon patties, canned salmon mixed with egg, cracker crumbs, and chopped onion, shaped into rounds and fried in a skillet, showed up on Friday supper tables across Appalachia and the rural South every week for decades. During the 1930s and 40s, a can of pink salmon cost less than 15 cents and provided enough protein to stretch across 2 meals for a family of 4. Coal mining families in West Virginia and eastern Kentucky relied on them because the company store stocked canned goods but rarely fresh meat. The patties fried best in a well-seasoned cast-iron skillet with enough grease to come halfway up the sides, and you pressed them thin so the edges went crisp while the center stayed moist. The smell of canned salmon frying on a Friday evening was so specific to these kitchens that catching a trace of it decades later could stop you cold in a grocery aisle. Cold macaroni and pickle salad was the kind of thing that showed up unannounced at summer picnics and somehow vanished faster than anything else on the table. Made with leftover elbow macaroni, chopped dill pickles, a spoonful of mayonnaise, and maybe some celery or onion if you had it, this dish was a masterclass in making do. It was creamy, tangy, crunchy, and came together in under 10 minutes if the pasta was already cooked. During the 1950s through the 1970s, this was a back-pocket recipe for frugal families who needed lunch or a side dish in a hurry. It kept well in the fridge, traveled nicely in wax paper or plastic tubs, and paired beautifully with sandwiches or fried meats. The pickles added just enough brightness to cut through the richness of the mayo, and the pasta made it filling without being heavy. It might not have had the elegance of a soufflé or the flash of a molded salad, but it had staying power. One bite, and you would swear you were back at your aunt's backyard table in midsummer. So our next dish comes with a bit of a history lesson that goes way further back than the time of our grandparents. Ham and cheese quesadillas may have been what they were binge-eating daily and serving up to us, but where did quesadillas ever come from? Apparently, they were not an American invention, and nobody could really find a solid name that they could credit with making the idea up first, until people did some history digging and found out that. Spanish settlers that tried their hand at taking over Central America in the very early days of the land brought Mexican culture with them. The rest, as they say, is history, and the people of the USA took to quesadillas very well. Especially easy variants like the ham and cheese one, which meant that you almost always had a snack that hit the taste buds just right and made you full too. The best part about quesadillas is that they are so quick to prepare and easy to make that you can enter Flavor Town in just 10-15 minutes, which is a pretty good sell for anybody. Convenient food is always the best after all. Fried potatoes and onions cooked in saved bacon grease was a meal that appeared on tables across the Appalachian South 3 or 4 nights a week. Potatoes sliced thin, a rough chopped onion, and a heavy spoonful of drippings from that jar, all pressed flat in a cast-iron skillet and cooked without stirring until the bottom turned golden and crisp. You flipped it in sections, not all at once, and the onions went sweet and dark against the edges of the potatoes. In the 1950s, a 10-pound bag of potatoes cost around 35 cents, and a single bag could stretch across a full week of suppers. The grease was free, saved from breakfast, from Sunday's fatback, from every strip of bacon that ever touched that pan. Nobody measured. You scooped until the skillet looked right. That instinct died with the women who owned those jars. Egg salad on saltines was a low-effort, high-reward meal that sat somewhere between a snack and a light lunch. All you needed were a couple of hard-boiled eggs, some mayonnaise, a pinch of salt, and a sleeve of saltine crackers. Mash the eggs with a fork, stir in the mayo, and spoon that creamy mixture onto crackers one by one. Some versions added chopped celery, mustard, or paprika, but many kept it basic. It was salty, creamy, and just rich enough to satisfy without weighing you down. Families turned to it in the 1940s and 1950s when lunch needed to be quick and frugal, and it stayed in rotation well into the 1980s. If you had eggs in the fridge and crackers in the pantry, you were halfway there. It was common to see this on a paper plate during card games, in lunch boxes wrapped in wax paper, or as part of a light summer meal when no one wanted to cook. Even now, it is one of those simple joys that takes minutes to make but sticks in your memory. Nobody is a stranger to wraps and how they dominate the bread world as one of the best things you could do with dough or pita or whatever wrap you have. Honey mustard chicken wraps are one kind in particular that have been really popular all over America, since a lot of families grew up eating these or bringing them to school. They were one of the most commonly demanded things to eat. Everywhere you would go, there was a craze for honey mustard wraps that was hard to beat out and impossible to escape. McDonald's had their own budget-friendly versions that did amazingly well with the people too, and home chefs soon found ways to even copy that. As a result, these chicken wraps have become a regular part of the average American diet plan. Also, they just work so well since they are pretty quick to eat too and can be made pretty fast as well. If you know what you are doing, 10 minutes is all you need to assemble and have a wrap ready to go. The sound came first, a sharp hiss when hot bacon grease hit raw greens, and then the smell of vinegar rising in a cloud of steam that filled the kitchen before the plate reached the table. Kilt lettuce, sometimes called killed lettuce, was the Appalachian way of turning raw leaf lettuce into something warm and wilted and dressed all at once. You picked the lettuce fresh from the garden, leaf lettuce, never iceberg, piled it in a bowl, and poured a hot dressing of bacon grease, apple cider vinegar, and a pinch of sugar directly over the raw leaves. The heat wilted them instantly, and you ate it before it cooled, because kilt lettuce that sat too long turned limp and sad. The window between too small and too bitter lasted only a few weeks. You didn't need a calendar. The lettuce told you when it was ready. Fruit cocktail with whipped topping was the shortcut dessert that made every child grin and every tired parent sigh in relief. All it took was 1 can of fruit cocktail, peaches, pears, grapes, and cherries in syrup, drained and stirred together with a big dollop of whipped topping from the tub. Served chilled, it was creamy, sweet, and light enough to finish off any meal. In the 1970s, this was the go-to dessert for last-minute guests, potlucks, or just a Tuesday night. You could jazz it up with coconut, marshmallows, or chopped nuts, but the plain version had its own charm. The whipped topping clung to every fruit piece, turning even a grape into something decadent. Best of all, you could keep both ingredients on hand for weeks. No baking, no prep, no problem. It was one of those nostalgic little treats that sat at the corner of convenience and comfort, always cold, always sweet, and always gone within minutes. Egg salad was another classic that people would often come home to when visiting their grandparents for Thanksgiving or just on the weekend in general. Egg salad typically consists of mayonnaise, mustard, and green onions, which add both color and crunch to the dish. When you think of a salad, your mind tends to immediately think boring and unimaginative, but egg salads can toss those opinions right out the window with just one bow. Especially if your grandma left her recipe laying around in some journal or cookbook she compiled all throughout her life. Egg salad in particular would go very well with rye, and it would work as a sandwich too. Grandmas loved bringing this one along for family picnics. Leftover pintos never went to waste in a mountain kitchen, not when you could mash them, shape them into patties, and fry them in a hot skillet until the outside turned crisp and the inside stayed soft and warm. Bean cakes were the second life of a pot of soup beans, made the day after the original meal when the beans had thickened overnight in the refrigerator or on the back of the stove. You mashed them with a fork, mixed in a handful of cornmeal or flour to hold them together, and fried them flat in bacon grease. During the Depression, when a 12-cent bag of dried pintos could feed a family for 3 days, bean cakes extended that to 4. The first day was soup beans with cornbread. The second day was bean cakes fried for supper. Nothing wasted, nothing thrown out. Every calorie pulled from that single bag of dried beans. The cornmeal crust gave them a crunch the original beans never had, and that crunch made it feel like a different meal entirely. Sardines and mustard on toast was the salty, briny pick-me-up that required almost no time and absolutely no apology. This was not a dish for the timid. In fact, opening a can of sardines was practically a declaration of independence in mid-century kitchens. You laid out your slices of toast, usually buttered and still warm, then carefully placed the sardines on top, sometimes whole, sometimes mashed slightly with a fork. A quick dab of mustard across the top gave it brightness and bite. Some people added sliced onion or a splash of lemon juice, but others left it exactly as it was, bold, oily, and rich in protein. Sardines were cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with nutrition. In the 1950s through the 1970s, this was a lunch you could count on, especially for workers and retirees who wanted something hearty but fast. It filled the belly, cleared the sinuses, and let everyone know you were not afraid of strong flavors. Whether eaten standing over the sink or seated with a folded napkin, this was the kind of 10-minute meal that made a lasting impression. There are times where you just absolutely do not feel like getting up and doing anything, and in those times, microwaving some mac and cheese can be really helpful. We are sure most of us have memories of spending the nights at our grandparents' and waking up to some mac and cheese in the microwave, or coming home from school to a bowl that you could lose your worries in. The cheesier it was, the happier a kid would be after eating it, and even at this adult stage of life, a hot bowl can bring all those memories flooding right back in. Mac and cheese started growing in popularity when Mississippi farm families adopted it as a regular meal, and from there onwards it spread to a lot of families everywhere across the states. We thank God for that little fact every day, since we do not know what we would do without it. But before anything could be stretched or seasoned, someone had to know what was safe to eat from the ground, and poke salad was the test that separated mountain cooks from everyone else. Phytolacca americana, pokeweed, grew wild along fence rows and ditch banks across the Appalachian South, and in early spring, the young shoots were one of the first greens available to families who had eaten nothing fresh since autumn. The plant was toxic if handled wrong. You boiled the leaves 3 separate times, draining and replacing the water each round to pull the poison out before the greens were safe to eat. After the 3rd boil, you fried them in bacon grease with salt, and they turned dark, tender, and rich, tasting like a cross between spinach and asparagus. Cherokee and rural Appalachian families had been preparing poke this way for generations, and the knowledge passed by standing at the stove, not from any book. One wrong step, skipping a boil, picking leaves too mature, and the dish could make you sick. You either knew how or you didn't touch it. Creamed peas on buttered toast was the warm, creamy comfort food you could pull together faster than it took the kettle to whistle. Just open a can of peas, pour them into a saucepan with some milk and a little butter, and stir over low heat until it thickens slightly. Some home cooks would toss in a pinch of flour or cornstarch to help it along, but plenty skipped it. The trick was all in the texture, silky and soft, not watery or clumpy. Meanwhile, slices of white bread were toasted to golden perfection, then generously buttered until they glistened. When the creamy peas were ready, they were ladled right on top. It might not win beauty contests, but this dish was affordable, filling, and beloved in many kitchens from the Great Depression to the late 1950s. A plate of this could calm a grumbling stomach without much effort, especially for working parents or tired children. Even better, it used ingredients that were nearly always on hand, and you could dress it up with bits of ham, paprika, or even shredded cheese if you were feeling fancy. But even plain, it was always something you could count on. Buttered noodles are a dish so strongly associated with the elderly that they even have another name. Introducing Grandma's noodles, which were a staple of any family gathering back when simple dishes like this were still enough to leave a great impression on everyone at the table. The eggs made you feel great because they added a very warm feeling to the dish, as well as being great for you. The butter itself was just the right touch that the dish needed and brought out the chewy sensation of the noodles so much more, and the overall flavor was something a mix between creamy chicken noodles and chicken cooked in butter, shredded and diced with vegetables. It screamed love in every sense of the word because it was a dish that took effort and, more than anything else, a lot of attention to detail to nail. But if that's the job, then there's no one better for it than the grandmas of the country. The tomato had to be warm from the garden, not the refrigerator, never the store, and sliced thick enough that the juice ran down your wrist when you bit into the sandwich. 2 slices of soft white bread, a heavy spread of mayonnaise, thick rounds of a tomato still holding the heat of the afternoon sun, and enough salt to make the flavor crack open. This was lunch and sometimes supper across the entire American South. A meal so simple that writing it down felt insulting to the people who made it. Hellmann's, first mass-distributed in the 1920s, became the only acceptable brand. Using anything else was grounds for a kitchen argument that could last a whole summer. The sandwich existed only during tomato season. When the last vine died in September, it vanished, and no winter tomato from a grocery store could bring it back. Hot dog and baked bean skillet dinners were born from the marriage of convenience and childhood cravings. They required almost no prep. Just slice up a few hot dogs, toss them in a hot pan, and once they started to brown and curl at the edges, pour in a can of baked beans. That was it. You stirred it around until everything was bubbling, then served it straight from the pan. It was fast, filling, and full of flavor, especially when the bean sauce soaked into the crisped edges of the hot dogs. In the 1960s and 1970s, this was a common weeknight rescue meal. No chopping, no measuring, and no need for side dishes unless you wanted toast or coleslaw on the plate. Kids loved it. Adults tolerated it. But everyone appreciated how little cleanup it took. You could add mustard or brown sugar if you were feeling fancy, or just leave it plain and let the sweet-savory combo do its work. It was the ultimate 10-minute hot meal when your brain was fried and your fridge was nearly empty. Grandma Olpa's apple pie is a classic that only grandmothers are aware of or know how to make, despite it being pretty simple. It's something you could make on your own, but you likely wouldn't achieve the same level of finesse. Apple pies like this one are typically filled with plenty of apples, topped with a lattice crust, and smothered in thick, rich applesauce. It would often make for the best Thanksgiving pie you could have, and they would certainly keep making it every time the holiday season came knocking. The mixture of butter sugar on the top as well as the sauce makes it unforgettable if you try it for the first time, and it is addictive enough to keep making you come back for more. This is also a recipe that grandmothers were fond of passing on. Tomato gravy started the same way sawmill gravy did. Bacon drippings in a hot skillet, a spoonful of flour stirred in. But where sawmill gravy reached for milk, tomato gravy reached for the canning jar. Home canned tomatoes, crushed by hand into the roux, turned the gravy a deep orange red and gave it a sweetness that the pepper-heavy sawmill version never had. A pinch of sugar went in if the tomatoes were too sharp, and the gravy cooked down until it was thick enough to sit on a split biscuit without running off the edges. Across the rural South through the 1940s and 50s, tomato gravy was breakfast, served alongside whatever the kitchen could produce: eggs if the hens were laying, a slice of cured ham if the smokehouse still had one. The color told you what kind of morning it was. Pale gravy meant milk was plentiful. Red gravy meant the cow had gone dry and the tomatoes were filling in. The American cheese and tomato open-faced melt was as simple as it was satisfying. You grabbed a slice of white sandwich bread, laid down a slice of tomato, sometimes salted, sometimes not, and placed a square of processed American cheese over it. Then it went under the broiler for a couple of minutes until the cheese started to bubble and melt into the tomato. The corners of the bread crisped up while the middle stayed soft. What came out was gooey, warm, and somehow always more delicious than the sum of its parts. It was popular in the 1950s and 1960s, when quick lunches had to be hot but easy, and families did not want to waste electricity on the stove. You could whip up a tray of these in no time, and people would fight over the browned, blistered cheese on top. Some folks added oregano or a splash of hot sauce, but most kept it plain. It was the kind of dish that taught kids how to use the oven, and how to make something delicious out of almost nothing. So here is a dish that you may not see coming or be prepared for, but it actually works really well this way too. We are talking about peanut butter jelly and banana toast, which is exactly what it sounds like. You take some toast, preferably toast until it's crunchy, then lather it with as much peanut butter and jelly as you desire, and layer it with sliced bananas. You may have only heard of that combo as a part of some protein shake or smoothie, but it works just as well sitting on top of bread as it does in a glass. This is also a perfectly refreshing option for when you are low on work, and grandmas obviously kept that in mind. When they could just tell that somebody in the household needed a sugar rush and a kick from behind to get them into high gear, they would feed them a lot more toast than was probably wise, but it would work every time. In the coal camps of West Virginia, potato soup meant something different than it did in town. There was no cream, no butter, no garnish. You peeled potatoes, 3 or 4 if you had them, cut them into rough chunks, dropped them in a pot of water with a chopped onion, and boiled them until the potatoes fell apart, and thickened the broth on their own. Salt, black pepper, and that was it. Miners' wives through the 1930s and 40s stretched this into a 2-day meal by adding water and reheating it each evening. The soup got thinner every night, but it stayed warm, and warm mattered more than full when the house had no insulation and the fire burned low. She ladled it into the same chipped bowl every evening. After she passed, that bowl sat empty in the cabinet for years. Leftover chili over cornbread squares was the ultimate no-waste comfort food that came together with a single microwave beep. The chili was yesterday's, cold, thick, and waiting in a bowl in the fridge. The cornbread came from a box mix, usually baked the night before and cut into squares, often still wrapped in foil. When hunger struck, all you had to do was stack, heat, and eat. The warmth of the chili soaked into the crumbly sweetness of the cornbread, making every bite feel like a reunion of flavors. You could top it with shredded cheese or a splash of hot sauce if you had time, but honestly, you did not need to. This was fast food in its homiest form, nothing fancy, nothing wasted. In the 1970s and 1980s, it was a common sight on dinner tables across the South and Midwest, where boxed cornbread and canned chili were pantry staples. It made use of leftovers without making them feel like repeats. 10 minutes, 1 plate, 0 guilt. Just heat, spoon, and dig in. People have been putting things on top of crackers for centuries now, and enjoying it as a simple biscuit elevates meat, cheese, and just about anything else to a new height. Tuna salad with crackers was just one of many popular additions to the trend, and it is a fan favorite across the nation. Preparing the tuna salad takes a little time, but assembling it on crackers takes less than 10 minutes. Grandmas had so many recipes like this that they could just be made in a flash but would fill you up or be a kind of snack you have never had before on your own. Tuna salad on crackers is something you can make too just as easily, so give it a try if you ever have just biscuits and some tuna laying around. Sawmill gravy got its name in the lumber camps of the late 1800s, where cooks fed crews of men using nothing but flour, grease, milk, and black pepper in quantities large enough to fill a washtub. The gravy was thick, pale, peppery, and poured over anything that held still: biscuits, toast, cornbread, fried potatoes. You started with a few spoonfuls of bacon drippings in a hot skillet, stirred in flour until it turned golden and smelled like toasted grain, then poured in milk slowly while scraping the bottom of the pan. The whole process took less than 10 minutes and fed a household for pennies. Some cooks called it bulldog gravy, and in the coal camps of eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, it showed up at every meal: breakfast, dinner, and supper. Because the mines paid low and the company store charged high. The pepper had to bite. If you couldn't feel the pepper, the gravy wasn't finished. She made it by sound. The sizzle of flour hitting grease told her everything a recipe never could. The peanut butter and lettuce sandwich is one of those Depression-era holdovers that makes people raise their eyebrows until they try it. At first glance, it seems almost like a dare. Why would anyone put crisp lettuce between slices of bread slathered with peanut butter? But during the 1930s and 1940s, it was an easy, no-cook meal that hit the sweet spot between nutrition and convenience. Peanut butter brought protein and staying power, while iceberg lettuce added crunch and a faint, watery freshness that balanced the stickiness. It was one of those clever tricks where texture did all the heavy lifting. Some families made it fancier with a drizzle of honey, others added thin apple slices or a dash of salt. But the basic version, just peanut butter, lettuce, and soft sandwich bread, was quick, cheap, and surprisingly refreshing. It traveled well in lunchboxes and showed up on supper tables when time or money was tight. These days, it has mostly disappeared from menus, but if you grew up with it, you might remember how odd it looked and how oddly good it actually was. Speaking of adding butter to the mix and elevating the dish, cheese has a pretty similar effect when you mix it with some scrambled eggs. It was one of the dreamiest breakfasts you could wake up to. The scent of freshly scrambled eggs forming a clear road that guided you to the kitchen, with each step taken increasing that early morning appetite. Once you sit, you are blessed with the glorious glow of cheese mixed with shining yolk and brilliant egg whites. scrambled to complete perfection mixed in with Grandma's special seasonings. That usually just meant a dash of paprika and oregano here and there. What was truly special, though, is how Grandma would manage to melt the cheese into the egg without compromising on how scrambled it was, which is an art lost to them now. If salmon patties came from a factory can, leather breeches came from the porch ceiling, whole green beans strung on thread and hung to dry in the open air until they shriveled into tough, leathery strips that could last through an entire winter without refrigeration. The Cherokee had been drying beans on rawhide cord for centuries before Appalachian settlers adopted the practice and renamed them leather breeches for the way the dried pods looked like miniature trouser legs. You rehydrated them by soaking overnight, then simmered them low and slow with a piece of salt pork or a ham hock until the beans softened and the broth turned dark and smoky. Some mountain families called them shucky beans. Same method, different hollow, different name for the same memory. The dried beans developed a concentrated, almost umami depth that fresh green beans could never match, and the old women who strung them every August swore the flavor came from the mountain air itself. Nobody strings leather breeches on the porch anymore. The taste of slow-dried August is gone with the hands that hung them. Hog Killing Day was the most important day on the mountain calendar. The first hard freeze of late autumn when families gathered before dawn to slaughter, butcher, and preserve every part of the pig that could be salted, smoked, or rendered. The mayonnaise and banana sandwich is the kind of recipe that sounds like a dare, but was once a very real part of many American lunches. During the 1970s, this sweet and creamy pairing showed up in school lunchboxes, kitchen counters, and budget cookbooks alike. You took 2 slices of white bread, spread each with a generous layer of mayonnaise, and placed sliced bananas in between. The result was soft, tangy, sweet, and absolutely polarizing. Some kids loved it, others traded it away. But it was quick, cheap, and surprisingly rich in calories, making it a go-to for households trying to fill stomachs without emptying wallets. Some families added a shake of cinnamon, a drizzle of honey, or even crushed peanuts to give it extra flair. But the classic version kept it simple and strange. Today, it is more of a nostalgic curiosity than a mainstream snack, but anyone who grew up with it remembers the creamy texture, the faint zing of mayo, and the shock of how oddly well it worked. If you were in a rush, out of lunch meat, or just adventurous enough, this sandwich was waiting in the wings. Who could ever resist pancakes? Since we are visiting the all-time classics which last even today in almost every child's diet and life, it would be a crime to go without mentioning Grandma's beloved fluffy pancakes. Did you ever wonder what made hers so much fluffier? Pancake houses across the nation seemingly met their match when confronted with a 60-something-year-old grandmother who loves to spend time obsessing over her grandkids. So what is it that home chefs discovered that several brands and franchises could not? There are a few tricks they would use, like letting the egg whites relax in the batter before cooking them, or having impeccable flipping skills so just the right amount of heat gets to each side. Some would just whisk and beat their eggs and batter so well that you got one supremely thick stack of pancakes. It seems the secret was simply the years of pancake-making experience that are hard to replicate. Cornmeal mush was exactly what it sounded like. Cornmeal stirred slowly into boiling water until it thickened into a dense, porridge-like mass. But the real meal came the next morning, when the leftover mush had been poured into a loaf pan and left to set firm in the cold. You sliced it thick, laid the slices in a skillet with hot grease, and fried them until both sides turned golden and crisp, while the center stayed soft and creamy. Cherokee communities had been cooking cornmeal this way long before German-American settlers in the Appalachian foothills adopted the technique, a practice that showed up in household records from Western Virginia and the Carolinas as far back as the 1700s. Topped with sorghum syrup or a drizzle of honey, fried mush was breakfast and supper depending on the household, and the overnight wait was the whole secret. Fresh mush fell apart in the skillet. You had to let the cold do the work. Patience was the ingredient that never made it into the recipe. Potted meat on saltines was the blue-collar lunch that did not pretend to be anything fancy, and that was the point. You could find the little metal cans of potted meat stacked high in grocery stores, especially in the 1950s through the 1970s. The meat inside was soft, salty, and somewhere between pâté and spreadable mystery, made from finely ground pork or beef with seasonings and preservatives. To eat it, you simply peeled off the lid, spooned it straight onto saltines, and maybe topped it with a sliver of onion or a dab of mustard if you were feeling fancy. For factory workers, school kids, and thrifty parents, this was a quick fix that traveled well and stayed shelf-stable in lunchboxes or glove compartments. It had that strange charm of being both humble and oddly satisfying. There was no need to cook, no need to think, just meat, crackers, and a few quiet minutes to enjoy it. It was salty, filling, and unmistakably from a time when simplicity ruled the table. The crunch of the cracker against the smooth spread was all it needed to be a complete meal. There was a time when the last meal of the day cost nothing but a fistful of cold cornbread and whatever buttermilk was left in the jar. Cornbread crumbled into buttermilk, eaten from a glass with a long spoon, was supper for families across Appalachia, the Ozarks, and the rural Deep South from the Depression years straight through the 1970s. The cornbread had to be cold, at least a few hours old, firm enough to hold its shape when the buttermilk hit it. You crumbled it by hand, poured the buttermilk over, and ate it standing at the counter or sitting on the porch in the dark. A full glass cost less than 3 cents in the 1940s. It required no stove, no heat, no preparation beyond the breaking of bread. The people who ate this every night did not call it a recipe. They called it Tuesday. The jar of bacon grease beside the stove was the most important ingredient in the kitchen, and nobody who grew up in these houses ever threw it away. The quick bologna and egg scramble was the kind of dish you could throw together half asleep, and it still somehow tasted like a full breakfast. Dice up a few slices of bologna, toss them into a frying pan, and once they started to sizzle and brown, crack in a couple of eggs and stir. That was it. You could finish cooking it in less than 10 minutes, and it paired perfectly with toast or even wrapped inside a slice of white bread for an on-the-go bite. It became a staple in working-class kitchens from the 1950s to the 1970s, especially for early risers who needed something hot before heading to work or school. Bologna was cheap and easy to store, eggs were almost always on hand, and together they made a hearty, salty, protein-packed dish. Some added onions or cheese, but most kept it plain and quick. The smell alone could drag people out of bed. And the best part? You only dirtied one pan. 30 suppers, every one of them made from a handful of ingredients and a few minutes of standing at the stove. Not one of them came from a cookbook. Not one of them needed a grocery run. They came from women who knew their kitchens the way a musician knows an instrument, by feel, by memory, by years of doing the same thing until it became part of who they were. If one of these meals brought somebody back to your table tonight, try making it this week. The canned chili over crackers, the fried bologna, the cheese toast. Pick one. Make it the way she would have made it. And if this list reminded you of someone, share this video with the person who needs to hear it. Until next time, take care.